why don't I broaden this a little bit to not necessarily just be outsourced, but more dealing with lists? Because I think that you may pick up uses for more than outsourced, but I kind of go into that anyway because it's part of the outsource. You kind of need to know how to deal with lists a little bit better. Go from there. Of course, if you're doing outsourced product, it's all step 6 in this case. What we're talking about in outsourced products, again, there's the quick outsource that is just type in a name, a quantity, a price, etc. That's call and get a quote. And the next part of that outsourced is often in the system by default under miscellaneous samples. There's a miscellaneous dynamic and a miscellaneous price list. Those are defined based on what they're doing with their list. Miscellaneous sample is, of course, choosing or dynamic is using a dynamic list of parts that you've put into the system, whereas the miscellaneous price list is using prices directly put in the list. Price, cost, and it uses those two. Pretty easy. What I want to talk about though more is there's how these lists work, your options in these lists, as well as how these lists as well as user-defined fields pull information into the system. So if we're looking at this list, you'll see a price lookup field and a cost lookup FX field. You'll notice that these are formulas. I can make this anything I want as far as the price and cost fields. You can also say that they are all parts. If this list is pulling apart and I say all parts, then list price value becomes the price of all of those parts based off your cost-based pricing. So if I want in a specific situation to just pull my cost or my price of one part, not all of them, this is an easy way to do it, because in theory I could say that generally my markup on material is this, but if I want to just mark up my material based off of a customer being wholesale, don't want to adjust any of the others, just how I mark up my material, you can do that by pulling in just that price or just that cost of that material from the list and adjust it that way. Now, this price and cost lookup are the only fields that actually have their own formulas to where it will understand it in CFL and nothing else needs to be done. If we're inserting columns, inserting properties, these properties are just an extra field in these columns that you can name anything and then call those values anything. The main difference here is there's no formula. It is just a number or a text. It can't see 8 times 5 or height times width, where I could make this value height times width times x. Now, however, you can call these values into a formula. I can write a formula in here and then tell it in the product to evaluate it first, and that way it'll actually convert it. Now, generally where you'll see that in the system is where we're using that is in the digital print product, like wide format prints. You'll notice you're picking a resolution. Well, if you actually looked at this resolution list, all right, wide format prints, I'll go to my variables, I'll pull up that particular variable, and then it will point me to the list as well. There's a reason I want to show you what I'm doing here. Okay. All right. Is that you'll see that each one of these, if I choose production, it's pulling a value into a property called, which pulling up the UDF for that printer of print speed. So I'm using this to actually pull information from a part. But what information I'm pulling, they're all looking at the same part, but do I want the production speed, the standard speed, the high speed, or the max speed, is what it's basically asking. So this is another way of using properties within a list. Now, this property in a list like this is used often instead of a user-defined field. They could be, either could be used. Meaning, I could create, instead of saying 750, pulling a UDF, I could just put a number here, and that's what it would use, and not look at the printer. So, as well as pulling a UDF is similar to pulling a list value. So based off my list on my part, so if I pull up a particular part, okay. Currently we have the UDF layouts for printers. Okay, so these are the values that are being pulled in associated with a specific printer. Based off of that list, it was looking at these different speeds.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So each one of these fields is defined with a UDF. I mean, it is a UDF.
It is a UDF. It's just on a layout so that you can look at it this way.
Right.
All of them are under here as well. But these are all the UDFs that are in the system for all the different parts. But you can create new ones. So if there's something I need to know about a printer, you can put it here, or you can put it in the selection list based off your printers.
Okay.
They either would work, and then you can pull in that value. It's just what is different things work a little bit better, easier to maintain. If it's just based off of a material category, like I want something defined based off of not necessarily the specific material, but that just the fact that it is banner material, then in my roll stock material type, in this particular list, we have your different material types. Then you could just add a category into here, and every time banner is selected, you could use that value. You know, and that's on a group type of thing. So compared to an individual part, might be easier to put as a UDF. But they can work the same way. It's just, where do you retrieve the information from? Do you want to retrieve it from a list, or do you want to retrieve it from a specific part?
Yeah.
But since parts are pulled into list, they can kind of work either way.
If I found some value that I just wanted to be able to pull from, and I created a UDF, I mean, which I wouldn't do without your advice, but if you created one, how would you create the field for it in the display?
You really can without customizable. However, it would still be here, as well as where most people do at that point, in the adjust part information screen. So let's just say we wanted to add a field for the printer, right? So instead of using that layout, if I was looking at my digital printer, see, basically what you have on any of these particular products, whether it's the printer, the cutter, etc., you have the basic information and then all the user-defined fields that go with it. So if I go to my column chooser, if I've added a new user-defined field, it will be in this list. It will generally be at the very bottom of this list. And so I can just add it into my grid and then move it up and down even until where in the grid I want it. So at that point, I can take a new field that I've added, move it up wherever you think it makes sense to be in this grid.
Okay, so you can always see it in this grid, even if you can't see it in the
on that form.
Just on that form. Okay, I see.
Correct. And so
Very
really, all of these are just user-defined fields. You know, the system is designed to allow you to build out a lot. We've just tried to pre-build as much as we could, you know, for the,
Yeah.
that makes sense
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah. One thing I didn't realize when I got serious was that I didn't realize there was a difference in the product I was buying and the customizable. I didn't even know those two terms existed. I just thought it was one big product. And so I'm adapting myself to the pre-built products as much as I can.
Correct. Now, the customizable, a lot of the expense in getting customizable is training. Because, you know, it's one thing to tell you that, you know, you can adjust pricing forms. It's another thing to teach you to do it and train you to do it so that everything doesn't get all messed up.
Well, and to be honest, I mean, we're way too small a shop to just to invest the time and energy in trying to customize too much.
Correct.
But and just in the interest, I mean, our business is a bit different than most sign shops in general. So we're kind of, you know, there's not anyone who writes better software for what we're trying to do, but it doesn't quite fit us either. So we're just having to kind of, you know, jump through some hoops to get it.
Sure, we're trying to tweak it out.
What we need. Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting and useful. That clarifies a couple of things for me.
Good. And that's why I thought it would be good for you to hear. And again, to set up your user-defined fields, you're just going to user-defined field setup, whether it's a part, because you can have a user-defined field on a part, a transaction, a company, contact, or a product. Go grab this, you know, and create a new one. When you create a new one, it wants to know what type it is. Now, this category here, if you're looking at a part, that's these check buttons. So if you create a new category, it will add a new button up to the top.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. So if you put all yours in one category, you know they're all just under one button as far as a filter. And then it wants to know if the checkbox, a number, a text, a time. Now, there is slight differences depending on what you're adding, meaning if I add a user-defined field to a part, it can physically be a drop-down list that already is created in the system because it can do the math. But on a company record, it can't do the math, so it's a list you would have to create in here. So there are slight differences between company, contact, transaction as far as what you can do. In a part, pretty much you can do anything. But whether it's a checkbox, a number, whether it's a text field, if it's a text field that wants to know if it's an edit box, a drop-down box, or use a selection list that's already in the system. You know, where they show, if it's required or not. Now, these are often used on company records to define things about companies. It can also be defined on the product, meaning if I was cloning my product of wide format print into something else, into maybe 5 other things, but I want to define, I don't know, their setup times differently. You know, I could have a product UDF called setup time, and then put my formula to look at that, and that way you'd only have one place to change it. On each product, you could just change the setup time in one place. You don't have to go right in the work in the formulas anymore. You can use that product, then would be triggered based off of whatever products in the system. You'll see this product wide format print has its own user-defined fields, if need be. So if I clone my wide format print, I could just adjust the values in here for things that were different, and then make them default correctly in the variables. That's, you know, in theory.
Rob, okay, a question.
Sure.
If you bring me a file and you said I need a 20 by 24 print from this file, first thing I'm going to ask you is, do you want a direct print? Direct simply meaning that we just print it as is. Or do you want a custom print? In other words, do you want us to do the cropping, to adjust the color to our best judgment and all that kind of thing? And the pricing is different, of course, because on the custom print, we've got to put more work into it. And we can't just do a simple percentage increase At the moment, our prices are
I mean, what
strictly
you really,
arbitrary. I just worked out whatever I felt like the market would bear.
I mean, what you're really talking about is the time to do it, right? Either creative or setup time, color correction,
well,
stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and it's not real predictable. I mean, you just pick a time, and well, no, it's not just that, because it goes a little bit deeper. A direct print's always from a file. There's no question about that.
Mm-hmm.
But you could come in for a custom print, and to simplify things, if you bring us a negative or a transparency, we'll scan it as part of the price. Now, I'm not going to try to throw that in as a layer of additional cost, I don't think, because it just, at this point, it'd be too complicated. But in other words, to just keep things simple for the customer, it doesn't matter what you bring us for a custom print, whether it's a file we have to adjust or a film we have to scan, we'll still produce it at the same price. Okay. It's just easier to explain that way. And these are not, there's a lot of things we've fallen into that I don't consider perfect solutions at all. It's just trying to make business go easily and smoothly. And but I've been puzzling some over how will I accommodate the custom prints and actually have them show up as a custom print on the invoice that the customer receives, because we need we need the customer to get an invoice that tells them what they got. If they got a direct print, if they got a custom print.
Okay. My recommendation would probably be to have two products. I just think it's going to be easier.
That's what I'm thinking.
So if I take this product and rename or clone one of them and call them standard prints and one custom prints, and then we tweak your custom prints to add in some values where we need to. Typically I mean, there are other solutions. You could always do an add-on that affects the price. You could always have it default more design time, just automatically for each original based off of that question at default more design time. Now, to bring things up to another level of complexity, are you familiar with what we haven't talked about is using assembly containers? All right. And so now, of course, if I added two originals, it would automatically bring in the design based off of that trigger. And I could manually select it or unselect it. And then you could set defaults, which we haven't done, but I could say take that originals and push it into my design as my quantity of 2. So this could default as based off the originals as well. Now, if we want to look at doing something of that nature, if I took my design product and my variables, should just be a quantity, all right, I could go in and say use the parent variable value of originals. Okay, and then default to 1 if there is no parent, or it can't find that variable originals from the parent. So that formula then with design would, of course, in my estimate, I'd have to clone it, will then change the quantity of files to the quantity of originals in my original product. Now this can be done for many things, as far as where you think about it. It can also be set up as a template. Okay, you can really default anything off of a parent, which in the same way that in a new estimate we default things off of a list. So if I'm in vehicle wrap, based off of me choosing the type of vehicle, it defaults all those values. In theory, you could do the same thing with even using a separate product. Now, again, this is all kind of theory at this point, but if I wanted a product where I could just select 18 by 24 core class signs, and it'll automatically fill out everything I need, but have a drop-down list. In theory, that's possible. Again, you'd want to get with your startup person, and it takes a good bit of design work, but but in short, if I took this miscellaneous list sample, we were talking about list earlier, right? I could go in and insert all my different properties. So height, width, material type, every field from my scroll format, my wide format print, I could make a property in this list. Then I could set those on my wide format print to default to these off the parent. So I could basically choose a product called Quick Products, drop down, choose my 4x8, it automatically pull the wide format print based off of and fill in all the information based off of this field. And that's kind of building a template to do something else. But you're building your template off of a list instead of UDFs, depending on what you need to do.
Can we talk about production times for a moment?
All right.
Okay, like with Lambda prints, I can indicate a production time on the print product, the wide format print product. Mm-hmm. And does that, I'm assuming, since I haven't seen how production times print out on work orders or anything yet, but those production times simply add up as you accumulate, like mounting and laminating and stuff like that.
They're generally defined differently. They do add up, but they're different. So if I choose a paper, material, equipment, etc., they're generally split by department. They're not completely split. So if I'm going to add grommets, for example, just make it simple and understandable. All right. So it's going to pull in, your labor and your times are based off different. I've got a print labor. Should have had.
I may have said it wrong. What I really mean is so that you can tell a customer when to expect this order to be ready.
Okay.
I want to tell them, that this order is going to take 3 days to complete. It involves printing, it involves mounting and laminating. And so where or how does that work? I mean,
actually it's by product. So wide format prints, no matter what you do to it, whether you're laminating it or not, it's going to assume 5 production. That's your default turnaround time. That can be changed on the order, of course. Well, there's no way at the estimate phase or even in the immediate order phase that it knows everything that you're doing in production to be able to tell you when this will be ready. I can tell give you some ways to see what's happening in production from the order or estimate. Are you familiar with the scheduling in an estimate or an order?
No, I haven't looked at that yet, and I need to, obviously.
Well, let me explain how this works first, and then you can kind of... All right, so if I'm in an order or an estimate, and I've put in a couple products, I'm going to do 10, 70s. All right, good enough. Now, in this scenario, if I go to scheduling, nothing's going to be there. The reason nothing's going to be there is because I haven't told anything to be scheduled yet. What I mean by telling something to be scheduled is it's still based off of parts. Currently all of your employees, you yourself, etc., has a calendar in the system. Well, these calendars can also be associated to parts in the system. It's not just a person's calendar, it could be a piece of equipment as well. So in this case, if I had a part, let's just go pull up my Muto, I'm going to say show on production schedule. So it's going to then give me a scheduling tab. It wants to know whether I have just one of these printers or multiples. Do I need more than one calendar is basically what it's asking. No, I just need one. Okay, so I'll call this mute at this point, and I'll save it. What that just did is it created a calendar in my activity for that particular machine. Now you may or may not see it, and it may require a refresh at this point, but all of these just become parts of a calendar. Now, looking at this in my product under scheduling, you'll now see it shows up in scheduling because I told it to be scheduled. This is the short view of that calendar, and I could look at the whole week and it will show you what's scheduled. Since I have 2.56 hours, I can place that on the calendar.
Wow.
And it will schedule 2.33 hours starting at 2:30 from where I started it and actually create it on the calendar. So now if I do another order, I will see that's blocked off. Also then, my production manager has the calendars of all his equipment. Even on his dashboard, he can go to his calendars, and he could have one just equipment calendars or whatever he wants. And that would show those equipment. When he sees that equipment, he could then move them around from here. If he needs to change a job over or move it over, he can do that. Now, in the same way that his equipment is scheduled with a calendar, if I tell a part, such as a labor part, to be scheduled, it is not going to look for a labor its own calendar. Let's just say I want to schedule the labor for printing. Now, a lot of people would not necessarily schedule the labor because it's easier to think about it on the machine, as far as that's your bottleneck.
Yeah.
Some things that are labor only, though, may be done differently. So if I show it on the scheduling, okay, this is what employees are going to be doing print labor. So whatever employees I say in here will be associated with this print labor. So now back in my order, make sure I've got print labor in here. Okay. Now I have print labor, but it doesn't want to know an instance, it wants to know an employee.
Wow.
And then I'm scheduling on that employee's calendar that time. So again, this is generally phase 3 or 4.
Yeah.
However, especially if you have one person that kind of production manages over a department or their printers, this can be helpful, even if this isn't used at the time of order, but it is used for a salesperson to be able to look at it and say, that machine's just crazy,
Yeah.
And that way it can be scheduled, where they just throw it on here and it goes to the production schedule, to be scheduled, and they know to put it on the calendar in the right spot. Viewing it from, a calendar view. Or you can put calendar views directly on your home screen as well. And calendars can be viewed as lists, instead of calendar view. So it just depends on what's easiest to work for you. We've kind of going further than I planned today, but that's okay. Thanks, everyone.